Hello, and welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show, a podcast to help you unlock tremendous growth for your app. My name is Shamant Rao. I'm the CEO of the boutique growth marketing firm Rocketship HQ and host of the podcast Mobile User Acquisition Show. In each episode, we feature experts in the field of mobile growth and discuss strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile growth marketing. By the end of each episode, you will have gained actionable and tactical insights that will help you make more informed decisions in your own work around growth. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is produced by Meryl Vincent, Content Marketing Manager at Rocketship HQ.
In today's episode, we are rebroadcasting an episode from our previous podcast, How Things Grow. Our guest today is Gina Gotthilf, co-founder at Latitud, a platform dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs and companies in Latin America. Prior to this, Gina worked as the VP of Marketing and Growth at Duolingo, which is an experience we are going to talk about in a lot of depth today. Prior to that, she worked as the International Marketing, Growth, and Community Lead at Tumblr. In today's episode, Gina talks about how she began her growth marketing career in spite of having a degree in philosophy and not starting with a lot of quantitative skills. She describes how she learned a lot of her skills through furious Googling and trying things out in her first job. And over the course of her learning and personal growth, she was able to ascend to a point where she was able to steer Duolingo's growth from 3 million installs to 200 million installs with very, very little paid marketing. In today's episode, Gina describes her whole journey. We talk about her start with Duolingo, how she drove international growth through PR in the early days, how she transitioned to product growth, some of the very unconventional product experiments and wins that drove widespread adoption for Duolingo, and much, much more. I'm excited to present this inspiring and very fascinating episode today.
Gina, welcome to How Things Grow.
Hi, thanks for having me, Shaman.
Absolutely. I would love to begin on the 4th of August, 2015. You were in Washington, D.C. What took you there?
I'm not really sure. I don't think it was a very important date. I'm kidding. It's probably, on that date, I was like, this is the peak of my career. I am going to quit. I was in the White House, and I had the honor of presenting to former President Obama.
Wonderful. How did that happen?
I would love to say something like, well, President Obama finally realized that I am one of the coolest people on earth, and he personally invited me to come and hang out, but that's not what happened. Mm-hmm. They were having their first and what might honestly be their last demo day at the White House, mm-hmm. and they selected a number of startups. I forget how many it was exactly, but something like, 40 startups to go to the White House and to sort of present. And we were one of them. And I honestly didn't think that President Obama was going to be there. I thought that we were just going to be presenting to people from the White House. And I thought it was a cool thing anyway, because I hadn't really, been to the White House outside of mm-hmm. the, like little tour that you do when you're a kid. Mm-hmm. So it was a big surprise. And the other funny thing is that they put us in the little room all the way in the back. Yeah. And I remember I turned to our CEO and co-founder, Luis, and I said, oh, we're in the loser's room. Because it felt like we were being hidden, but actually there were about 5 startups that they had selected that were actually going to get a chance to present to the president, mm-hmm. In person. And so we were one of them, and it was a huge surprise to learn that because they didn't actually tell us about what was happening until about 10 minutes before he entered. Yeah. So they were being really finicky about the angle of our poster and if our pitch was good enough. And I just thought they were being super annoying. Uh-huh. But then I understood later why they were being so meticulous, and I'm glad that they were.
I'm sure all that finickiness would have been absolutely worth it. That rendezvous with Obama was such a long way from where you were at in your own life even just a few years earlier. You graduated in philosophy from the same college that Steve Jobs actually went to. What was the path that led you from there, from a liberal arts degree, from a philosophy degree, to becoming a growth leader?
Yeah, so my path has not been at all conventional or like a straight path. And also, I didn't graduate from Reed. I actually dropped out from Reed, just like Steve Jobs did.
I did not know that. Okay.
I transferred to Brandeis University and I graduated from there. So I do have a degree in philosophy. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I thought that I wanted to be a film director, but I went to my career counselor at Brandeis, and I remember she looked at my resume and said, "What have you done with your whole life?" And it was so sad because I was a super nerd and overachiever, and I cried, and I just couldn't believe that nothing that I had done like seemed to be worth anything to her. And so I went and I decided to work at a neuroscience lab for a year because I was interested in neuroscience, and I thought that maybe that would give me like a more serious angle to things, and I don't know, it would sound really impressive. So I legitimately did, and I co-authored a study. That was cool, but I didn't want to work underground for the rest of my life. So I knew that wasn't for me. And then at that point, I applied to 100 different jobs when I graduated, and I didn't hear back from almost any of them. And I heard back from like 2, and they were no's because they had discontinued their job offerings. One was TripAdvisor. I remember they were like, "Sorry, it's like the recession. We're not hiring anymore." And then the other one, I finally got an internship at a digital media agency, and I realized that really like studying philosophy, you learn so much and yet you learn nothing. And I had no actual real world skills. I didn't know how to use Excel. So it was kind of a really scary moment. And all I wanted was a job that would sponsor my visa to stay in the US because I'm Brazilian. So I took it, and I ended up working in digital media kind of because of that. There's like a long, windy path of what happened there, with some stories that are probably not kosher for this podcast that I'll share with you later. But I learned tons, and I kind of had to Google a lot on the job. I remember like every day I'd have to be like Googling things like how to HTML, like HTML for dummies, because I was afraid that if I asked people questions and they realized I didn't know what I was doing, that I would get fired and I would lose my visa.
The visa is a bit of a nightmare, and you and I have talked about what it's like. That's how you got into the digital space, and you learned through a lot of Googling. You ended up in Tumblr. And one of the initiatives you did launch was you basically helped launch Tumblr in Latin America. How did you do this?
So after the digital media stuff, I decided that like corporate life wasn't for me, and that whatever. And I actually I went back to Brazil, and I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I ended up working. Tumblr came and found me, and it was really kind of a chance moment. That happened because I think I'd done a very good job networking without realizing it before. I just met a lot of people in New York and really tried to do my best job, even though I didn't like the work that I was doing. And I think that left a good impression in their mouth. So they came to me and they said, "We need help with Brazil. We don't have a budget. Can you help us?" And I was like, honestly, I have no idea. And they were like, "Well, it would be great if you did. Okay, thanks, bye." And I didn't launch Tumblr in Brazil in the sense that the same way with Duolingo, like Tumblr was already available online and there were users in Brazil, but the launch, and it's the same thing that we did with Duolingo, it was more of a marketing play. Like, big splashy launch. Now we're going to get PR around this. Now we're going to get like people talking about it, even though it's not really a launch if something was already there before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it worked out. And so what we did was, I threw this was the only 2 things they asked me to do, which was the only thing they asked me to do was to throw 2 big parties in Brazil to like mark the launch of Tumblr. And there were 2 1,000 people parties, one in São Paulo and one in Rio. Probably the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life was event planning, and I don't think I ever want to plan, not even like if I get married one day, I don't want to plan a wedding. After this experience, but the cool thing was that I then spent time curating all the artists and musicians and personalities that were on Tumblr in Brazil that had Tumblr presences to come and really represent what Tumblr felt like in real life. And it was like drawing upon all the theater experience I had in school, and I got to do that in the real world. And then we got tons of I basically reached out to a lot of reporters, and I said, like, look, this really cool thing is happening. There's these like Americans in tech who are super important. Would you be interested in talking to them? And found a way to pitch to all these different verticals that ended up being super relevant. And we got tons of attention and tons of PR, which I, by the way, didn't know was called PR at the time. I just thought it was emailing reporters.
And
that worked really well. And then of course it was a lot of it wasn't just we did PR and that was it. It was about figuring out what was different about Brazilian usage of the product compared to that of the US. Turns out people were not really logging or creating accounts and logging into Tumblr in Brazil like they were in the US. They didn't even realize that they were looking at Tumblrs. They were just sharing links with each other to funny internet pages,
Right.
like on Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And so we started thinking, okay, well, if we want people to create an account and spend time on Tumblr, we need to figure out what's going to make them do that. And so go after the content that will really matter to them and try to get that on Tumblr. So it ended up being a lot of comedy, a lot of YouTube celebrity type people, and then important media corporations and museums. And I would go and pitch and say, like, I think you guys should make a Tumblr. This is what I think you should do. I'm going to get one started for you. And then I knew from my agency experience that they wouldn't want to leave like kind of an empty page up, you know, so they would kind of have to continue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got tons of new content and relevant local content. Did some community work. Also, I did a meetup that was their biggest ever with 1,500 people.
Wow.
And that was it. And then we did work in Chile and in Argentina, following Brazil. That was along the same lines, but a slightly different for each country. So for Chile, we ended up focusing a lot more on the music industry, and we also had meetings with the government. In the Casa de la Moneda, they were interested in communicating with young people in their population more effectively. So we pitched Tumblr as a tool to do that.
Right. That's such an amazing story. You connected with a lot of the key cultural influences and some of the key movers and shakers in the media. You just brought everyone together and just built this flywheel that started spinning. I think that's such an amazing story. And what took you from there to Duolingo?
So I spent a year doing that for Tumblr, and then they were gearing up for acquisition. I didn't know, of course. And they laid off my boss, and then they laid off my boss's boss, and then they switched COO. So I was like, what is happening? And I was like the only person in Brazil. So they had me come to New York and have a meeting like with David Karp and the new COO. And I presented all our results. They were like, this is amazing. This is great. But yeah, we're not doing international anymore. Like, oh, but I have all these partnerships in place and we're doing all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, well, we need to get our stuff in order here in the US. I don't have time for international.
Yeah.
So at that point, I could either like try to stick with Tumblr and come to the US.
Yeah.
But the company, I obviously didn't understand what was happening to it at the time. But to me, it was just like, wait, like they're firing people left and right. They're like changing plans. This doesn't feel super stable.
Yeah.
And I'd spent a whole year developing a bunch of relationships in Brazil. So I knew like all the media players, I knew all the tech people, and people knew me. Like I'd given a bunch of talks and I'd been in a bunch of interviews and magazines. And so I thought, there's a lot of companies like Tumblr that seem to be interested in growing in Brazil and other Latin American countries and have no idea where to start. And maybe I could just do this. Maybe I could just do this growth thing for other tech companies too. So I launched my own consulting company.
Yeah. Which was called?
It's kind of embarrassing.
I've done my research, so please.
It's called Global Ginga.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good idea at the time. So Ginga is a word in Portuguese that means like your ability to maneuver around situations.
Right.
Like soccer is big in Brazil. So people who have Ginga can like play soccer really well or dance really well.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I was doing. I was helping companies like come to Brazil and kind of figure out what they had to do, like no matter what, and I was executing it for them. And then Ginga was also a play on my name, which is Gina G, but like letters and then my clients ended up calling me Global Gringa because Gringa. But whatever, so it didn't matter. So yeah, I started this consulting company, and Duolingo was one of my clients.
Great. So you started Global Ginga, and you started helping Duolingo, and you eventually started working full time with them. And presumably that's when you came back to America. Can you set the scene and tell us? Go ahead, sorry.
I came back to America for that, and also because I didn't want to be kidnapped.
Oh. You were in all the magazines. You were in all the newspapers.
No, not for that reason. It's just because São Paulo is like, Brazil is not super safe, and I almost got kidnapped once, but it had nothing to do with who I was. It was just like bad luck. I was in a really nice place at the wrong time.
Oh no.
And So anyway.
Gotcha. Well, so you escaped kidnapping and came to America. Can you set the scene and tell us what Duolingo was like when you joined?
Yes. So I was employee number 20. And it was very much like the startup that you'd read about, like they ordered pizza at night and they stayed late, and it kind of felt like a college environment in a really tiny office in Pittsburgh. They had 3 million users, which you know what is honestly is a lot. Like it's not like they had 0 users. And this is because Luis von Ahn, our co-founder and CEO, is this amazing guy who created the CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA, and he sold 2 companies to Google, and he won a MacArthur Genius Grant, and then he gave a TED Talk about Duolingo and its mission, and that drove a bunch of people to sign up for the beta, waiting for it to like become available, and that really helped at launch. So we had those 3 million users. They were all focused in the US. Nobody that I knew had heard about it. My parents were like, "Wait, what? What are you doing?" And I was in Brazil, so they hired me as a consultant. I had never met any of these people in real life, and I'm working with them, through email and Skype and stuff like that.
So 3 million users, and I imagine the product was also relatively basic. From what I've read, I know that at least my research tells me that your day one retention, which is the percentage of people who came back the day after they first started using the app, was like 15%. So if 100 people install, 15% would come back in a single day, which isn't very great. So when you and your team looked at that number, what did you think?
Well, so to be honest, Shaman, like I didn't get the app at that level. The team had done a fantastic job already of optimizing. So it did start out at 15%, but what I walked into was an amazing products team. And they spent tons of time A/B testing. So I can't take credit for all of that.
Right.
My main role when I came on was basically driving awareness and building the brand and helping them launch all over the world and get people to find out about what this was, and then find other ways to get users, like government partnerships, etc. Like whatever was not product related. And then about 2 years ago, they said, "Hey, can you take over growth?" Which was like not an official thing at Duolingo yet. They had like a product team that was like doing A/B tests. And so that's when my team came in, and we were like, okay, let's look at all of these sub-metrics that we've never really paid all that much attention to. And now let's try to not just grow D1, but also D14, D30. Let's look at referral. Let's look at our activation. Let's see what's going on with our emails and notifications, and like really just take this to the next level.
Right. I would love to dig into all of that. But I'm curious, was there a point when after you came in, you realized, okay, this thing could become big. This thing could become the mass market product with tens of millions of active users and hundreds of millions of downloads that it has today? Is there an inflection point that you can think of?
Well, for me, I joined the company full time because I really already believed in it. Although I didn't really know anything about product. Looking back, now that I've actually worked with product, I knew nothing. I just thought like, okay, this is cute. But what really sold me on it was the mission. Like I'm not American, and I would never have gotten all the opportunities that I had I not learned English at a very young age. And learning a second language, like learning English in developing countries, can double or triple your income potential. And I felt like, I was in the top, like, tiny percentage of people in Brazil who would ever get the chance to do that, just because I came from a good family, and I believed that by investing in that, I could help change millions of people's lives. So I believed in that, and then I also really believed in the team, and especially in the founder and CEO, because he was obviously just fascinating, a genius, a detail-oriented, really attuned to everything, and every single person I talked to at Duolingo was just the best in class in whatever it is that they did. And I hadn't felt that way about a team before.
Wow. Yeah. When you're working with amazing people, you want to stay.
Yes.
Sure. Great. You said you were in charge of growing the app, spreading awareness. I'd love to dig into that in a little more detail. What was your approach to growing the app after you came in? What were some of your first priorities?
In terms of the growth, like the product team, or the originally?
Originally, as soon as you came in, you were charged with growing awareness for the product, from what I understand. What were some of your first priorities at the time? What did you first do?
Sure. So I drew on the playbook that I had used for Tumblr and seemed to have worked, which was like, okay, now I know all the journalists and editors that matter in like the top verticals here in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I can email them and tell them like, look, I am in touch with this amazing guy who created the CAPTCHA and like did all this stuff, which by the way, I feel like Luis at the time was kind of trying to hide it because he didn't want to talk about the CAPTCHA anymore. He was so over it. You know, it'd been like 10 years already.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that like the nerds in tech would like totally geek out on the fact that like they could meet the guy who had invented that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked with them, with the team, to like figure out like kind of exactly how to position it, how to position the mission, how to position what he was doing, and it wasn't too hard because I was sold on it. Like I really believed. So I reached out to all these different journalists, and I helped Luis. I basically set up a lot of speaking opportunities for Luis in Brazil.
Yeah.
So he came, and we did, and like I did a little tour with him. So I went and like took him to like this big conference where he gave the opening speech, and then I took him to this big organization where he gave an important talk. And then I had already reached out to all these journalists saying like, this guy who's not only amazing, blah, 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 has actually been invited by the most important institutions in Brazil to come, especially, you know, to give a talk, even though I had kind of organized that behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like the opportunity to speak with him? And that worked out super well. Again, like I only could do that because Luis like already had a lot to work that I could work with.
Right.
But that's kind of what we did. And it worked so well in terms of the numbers that we saw, in terms of new users, that he then came back to do a second round of interviews some months later.
Uh-huh.
So for us, that was super impactful.
Yeah.
And then we started thinking, and then, well, before they actually hired me full time, they said, okay, this seems to work for Brazil. Can you do the same thing in Chile and Argentina?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So then we went and we did the same thing in Chile and Argentina. So then they said, okay, well, can you come on full time, and maybe we can do this in other countries? And so then the step was like, all right, well, if we're going to think about other countries, where should we be thinking of?
Right.
How are we going to prioritize this? And then going to those countries myself and figuring out how to do that same thing, like basically get attention, and able to talk about Duolingo and Luis and our mission in places like Turkey and India and Japan and a bunch of other places that I'd honestly never been to in my life.
Wow. That's such a unconventional approach to growing an app or a product, simply because, you know, most apps and products that you know and I know, when they decide to grow internationally, what they do is they go to Facebook, they go to Google, they put money behind an ad campaign, and they see growth that way. Did you consider alternative ways to grow, maybe in addition to the media press trips that you were already doing?
Not paid. We had agreed not to do paid from the very beginning because we were not profitable. We didn't even have revenue and venture backed, and we didn't want to start paying for users until we knew that our retention was where we wanted it to be, and that we knew that we had an LTV for our users, which is finally, you know, like the case now.
Yeah.
So we started doing paid acquisition actually quite recently, but we were doing other things other than PR. So in terms of growth, like I think the PR helped a bunch, and like international launches, et cetera. Like I said, the team was like really optimizing the product and making sure that it was actually something that people were happy to share with each other. And once they discovered it, they would tell their kid or their friend. So that made a big difference. And then we also did other unconventional things like, oh, you know what would get us a lot of attention in Colombia and also a lot of credibility if we can partner with the government and like have schools use Duolingo officially.
Right.
If we work with the Department of Education in New York, you know, like we get a lot of inbound like random emails like, hey, like from like whatever, and just started thinking about, okay, well, what can we do that would really impact a lot of people and that we can actually get people to take us seriously, because Duolingo is an app and it's very fun and cute. So we needed to make sure that even serious language learners knew that this was like really a real way to learn a language. So we did a lot of that as well, and I think that it made a difference. Yeah.
So let's say you went to Turkey or India, you do this press tour, Luis speaks, you speak to a lot of media, and let's say you get out of the country, you go to your next country. Would you notice that the user growth in the country that you just left would start to slow down?
Absolutely. But what we saw, and because retention was in a good place when we started, what we saw would be like a big bump. Like we'd get featured on the App Store and we'd get all this press, and then we'd see this huge bump. And then it'd fall down, like in terms of like new users per day, to about like 40 to 50% of that bump, which is still way higher than it was before.
Yeah.
You know, and then in terms of our users, we were retaining them and they were telling other people. And so that engine was working.
Right.
So that's why we kept using that same technique across countries. Now, there are some places where it was more effective than others, and there's some markets where it's just really hard, like from so many different like perspectives. Just in some countries, it's hard getting. Well, so I was working without agencies, right? I was just emailing media by myself, like journalists. And I did that because I just haven't had the best experience working with agencies in terms of results. But then, you go to like Korea and suddenly nobody speaks English and they don't really understand what you're pitching, and maybe you're coming at it from the wrong perspective. So I really do feel like there are places where I didn't like hit it out of the park, but then there are places where we did, like same thing, like in Turkey, and suddenly like our numbers like skyrocketed.
Can you think of any moments or instances that you found particularly challenging during this phase while you were touring all these countries?
For sure. There's so many.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say the toughest. So from a very technical perspective, like getting the PR piece is just like getting journalists to really get that this is like a big deal, and it's not just like a top apps you should use today list type feature, but they should really be interviewing and like writing about it and the mission, etc. That takes a lot of work. And then also I was really kind of particular about making sure they included a link to Duolingo, because we would see a very big difference in traffic if people included a link in the article versus if they didn't.
Right.
And journalists hate it when you ask them for that. So I had to be like really nice and kind of beg. So that was like not great. But in terms of like really challenging, I think probably it was, I went to China to launch Duolingo, and I was there for a month by myself.
Yeah.
And that was trying not only just, I speak some Chinese. I took 3 years of Chinese in college, but I'm not by any means fluent. And so like, figuring out how to get by and like figuring out connections there. It was just such a foreign world, and you need to have ties with the government. And when we launched, we got 1 million downloads the first day, which is huge. And then our app got blocked by the government. And so and I was just there, and there's nothing I could do about it. And, I had been in touch with Apple, and they were like, what is wrong with your app? And I was like, it's not on our end, but like they wouldn't really believe us. And then all the people who had downloaded the app started rating it like 1 star, because they were like, this app doesn't work, so like, and it was just so frustrating after all that work to see that happen and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah. And you were alone by yourself in China, and I imagine that can be isolating.
Absolutely. You know what's most isolating? Not only the fact that like you're in a place where like nobody really like looks like you or speaks your language, or that anybody, but also just a time zone. Like nobody was ever online when I was awake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it was very isolating.
To switch gears a little bit, I've admired that you guys have had such an unconventional growth strategy. As you've said, you've done PR, you've done extensive media outreach. You guys have done extensive experimentation. I do know that you guys have been mentioned quite a bit by Tim Ferriss, who's a hero of mine as well. To the extent that you're comfortable sharing, can you speak to how he's impacted Duolingo?
Yeah, well, so, he might have had more influence before my time, like directly with our co-founder. So I can't speak to that. But he was an early investor.
Yeah.
So that, of course, helps. He mentioned us several times, and he does have a very serious following.
Yeah.
But I think the most impactful thing that happened was, so I had a chance to have breakfast with Tim Ferriss at his house.
Wow.
And breakfast with Tim Ferriss was really just tea because he was fasting, which was very disappointing because I thought I was going to eat. And that was like just a really cool conversation that we had about kind of like the branding and the positioning and what we should do. And during that conversation is when I said, hey, Tim, like maybe you could just like, interview Luis for your podcast. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, of course, obviously. I'm like, oh my God, let's make that happen. And I honestly did not understand the impact that interview would have.
Yeah.
I knew Tim Ferriss was kind of a big deal, but like, I just, he's like a tech, like Silicon Valley big deal. It's kind of a bubble, but whatever. Like he's awesome and it's going to be good for us. But honestly, like I couldn't have imagined. We went to India like 6 months later, a year later, and people were like, oh my God, you're the guy from the Tim Ferriss podcast. Oh. Please. And like everywhere. So like that was really, really big for us and super worthwhile. And honestly, Tim Ferriss, in my humble opinion, is one of the best interviewers that I've listened to. He's just so good at getting people to talk really relevantly and carry a conversation that the interview he did with Luis was really rich and different.
Absolutely. I loved his interview with Luis, and he is very much an inspiration to me and for this podcast. Absolutely.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So maybe you should fast.
I will try to do that. Yes,
Go into hyperbaric chambers.
Yes, cold showers, all that fun stuff. So at this point, you've been focused on media outreach. You've been focused on getting the word out about Duolingo. How did you transition to growth and experimentation?
So, they were basically throwing at me whatever was in the product, because I was one of the very, very, very few people at Duolingo who was not an engineer or a designer. So they were like, oh, look, we have this opportunity. Check it out. Oh, maybe this is a biz dev thing. Check it out. Maybe this is like whatever. I was also running social media, a lot of our copywriting, anything that was in product. So it was kind of all over the place. Then it became a lot more kind of what I described, along with social media and communications for the brand and branding. And then finally 2 years ago, they came to me and they said, hey, Gina, and Luis and Severin, the co-founders, they came to me and said, look, we had a conversation with the board and they feel like someone at Duolingo needs to own our growth numbers. And I was like, great, what's a growth number? I mean, I knew like we cared about our DAUs. I was kidding, but like I really understand what he meant. And they said, so far Luis has been sort of the one who really tracks like our DAUs, our MAUs, our retention numbers, et cetera, and make sure that things are in order. We need someone to do that. And we discussed whether we should hire or promote internally, and we think that you should do it. Right. And I said, that's great. I have no idea but what that means. And I also don't know how to use Mixpanel. I'm just kidding. I didn't actually say those things out loud. I was just like, great, totally got your back. And then went back and like Googled what is growth? And read everything I could possibly read about it, and really just went into super study mode. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so I also reached out to a bunch of people who were really, really knowledgeable about growth. And the guys from Google Capital, now Capital G, really helped a lot because they made intros. Right. And they're one of our investors. And so I got to like really quote unquote, pick the brains. I hate that expression, but I got to like really talk to people who knew what growth was, and at the very least, like jot down what it is that I needed to learn more about. And then it was originally it was a very tiny team. We had an engineer and we had a designer, and that's it, if I'm not mistaken. And it was just like, look at some numbers and try some stuff out, you know? I remember like the day our engineer decided to add a badge to our Android app, like saying, you know, like the little badge that says that there's like something new on the app and you have to click to find out what it is. Oh, like a little red dot. And he was like, he wanted to do that, and I was like, I don't know, it seems kind of spammy. Like, I don't know, maybe try it. And it he just went back to his desk and did it anyway, because it was like 10 minutes of, I don't know, running code, like 7 lines of code. And that was like one of our most impactful experiments ever. So it was really a lot of experimentation and reading and trying things out and thinking about like what are the most impactful places that we can touch and what are the highest ROI things that we can work on. And then from there, the team really grew over time and ended up being about 12, 13 people, including a product manager, designers, engineers, and a data analyst.
Yeah, what I love about that story is that you started from basically scratch without any background in what you might call hard quantitative skills.
I will say that I'm proud of that. However, I will say that, you know, a big component of that is just that I really got to work with excellent engineers. People who really were so smart. And I know I brought value to the table, but I couldn't have done any of this without them. Yeah.
And, you know, when you started running these experiments, how did you pick some of these experiments? Or what were some of the experiments that you first tried?
So originally, this is like not exciting at all. We kind of had like a dump of like experiment ideas that had come up from like different people across the years that we never had time to try. So we had like a little, like, I think I went through like 3 different Excel documents that like one person put together and an email someone sent someone else, and just like try to gather all of that. Like, you know, it would be cool if we did this, or maybe we should try this. And oh, this company did this and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sat down and looked at all of those and thought like, okay, let's prioritize them in terms of like how much effort it'll take to run each experiment and what we think the potential gains could be.
Right.
And there, I think I need to credit Avnish Verma, who was a senior product manager at Duolingo at the time, who like really showed us how to do that. And he eventually went on to work for Uber, but he had been at Google before. And so that's kind of how we started thinking about it, and we started going through the list. And then once we started getting the hang of it, and I had been reading a lot of articles, we started coming up with our own ideas like, hey, maybe this would work, maybe that would work. And we just add it to the list and continue to prioritize it. That's how we've done it for the past 2 years. Is we have this ongoing list and we're prioritizing it every quarter. Like we take we reprioritize everything. We look at the top, like our top priorities, and then we try to think of like a theme or something to focus on. Like we're going to improve teen retention this quarter, or like we're going to, do blah. And then like really improve like the social experience. I don't know, whatever it is. And then find experiments that we think are most impactful, and that help us hit that metric. We would set OKRs, and then we would go for it. And depending on the results of each experiment, we could then iterate on those ideas or just scratch them and move on.
Got it. Yeah. What were some of the experiments that failed?
So many. I would say 50% of our experiments failed.
Wow.
And I think there's a lot of situations where we're like, oh my God, I remember when we decided to like redesign the newsletter, and anything that involves design was just it was so much work. And I think on one hand it's because I can't do it myself. So I just feel like finicky. I can write copy, but I can't design. So I need to rely on other people. And then design at Duolingo is standards are extremely high. So in order to get something approved, it takes a very long time. And we did all this work, and then it had zero impact on anything.
Yeah.
But, to be honest, I think that our biggest failures weren't these disappointing experiments. I think that our biggest failures were when we ran experiments and they either worked or didn't work. And then later, this happened like 2 or 3 times. Later, we realized that actually we weren't tracking metrics properly. Mm-hmm. That to me is the most frustrating. It's for the whole team, we were like, wait, what? For example, there's something called aliasing. This is extremely technical, but it was a huge problem at Duolingo for 6 months, where we were working on sign up, sign in things, in terms of optimizations. And then we realized that once someone who already had an account, but forgot that they had an account, created a new account, or signed in or whatever, the system wasn't linking accounts. And so they were creating new accounts that weren't really new accounts. And it was inflating our number of new users and deflating our number of retention. And when we realized that, we were like, wait, okay, first of all, we don't know how to fix this. And second of all, how many experiments has this affected?
Damn.
So that was just it just makes you want to bang your head against the wall.
Yeah, that can be frustrating when you don't know, when you realize you don't know if everything you're reading is right or not.
Right, then you just feel like you're running blind in the darkness.
Yeah. And what were some of the experiments that you were proud of?
So I can tell you about the experiments that I think were most impactful at Duolingo, and also that I'm proud of. I'm proud of from the perspective that we did a good job. Again, none of this was my work alone, and it all comes from brainstorming with the team and teamwork. Mm-hmm. I think one of our most proud things in the growth team was creating the badge system on Duolingo, and adding badges so that when as you go you earn badges. The early riser, the early bird, early riser, late bird, whatever. The night owl, and then if you buy something, you get something, and coming up with those cute names and all what the badges were going to look like, how the system was going to work. And I'm really excited about this because it could have been a humongous flop. It took us, 4 months to do this. Because just think of you think just add badges, but what does that mean? Okay, well now we have to figure out where in the app they're going to live. Are people going to be able to showcase them? Are other people going to be able to see them?
Yeah.
How clear they're going to be? What is the mechanism? Are they going to be tiered or not?
Yeah.
Then come up with the design and the copy. It really took a long time, and implement the whole thing. But it ended up being extremely impactful for us, not in more ways than we really imagined. Not only were people coming back more to Duolingo because they were getting badges, they were doing stuff arbitrary, not arbitrary, but stuff that we were giving them badges for that wasn't even just benefiting our team, but benefiting other teams at Duolingo, revenue. you were like, buy something in the store and get a badge,
Right.
Add a friend and get a badge. So
Yeah.
we were helping the social team. So like everyone was like, oh my God, give a badge for this, because they wanted us to help with their metrics too.
Yeah.
And so then we iterated and actually spent time like doing a tiered system so that we could have like kind of a better incentivized format and really nail the ones that were bringing in the most results.
Yeah, and you realize how much people value even digital goods, right? A badge, like a badge, it doesn't exist. It's fully virtual, but it's still important. It's so cherished and valued by a lot of people.
Yeah, it makes people feel good. And a lot about gamification is that it's just like giving people that sentiment of like accomplishment. And I feel good. And like, I don't know why, but like, I'm just going to keep doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. You've spoken about how Duolingo's used gamification quite extensively. How did this begin?
Duolingo was originally launched with the intent of being a game. So it was baked into the product from the very start, before I was born. Just kidding. Before I was a Duolingo. I'm old. I was born. So the idea behind that is that it's learning a language for, those of your listeners who have done it. It's like very, very hard because it takes a very long time. It's not the kind of skill that you can like really dedicate a weekend to and then be done. Like I studied Chinese for 3 years and I still barely get by.
Yeah.
So you really need to dedicate like years of your life to this, and you need to be and also like just binge studying like 1 day a week doesn't work. You need to do it very regularly.
Right.
And so add that with the fact that like now we're telling people, hey, you can do this by yourself. No teachers are going to be making you do it. Your parents are not going to be angry if you don't do it. You're not paying money, so you're not going to feel guilty. And it also conflicts with your Facebook time.
Yeah. That's a very high bar. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that was like the big problem that the team wanted to solve, like from the get-go. Like, okay, well, if we're going to try to get people to learn a language, what are we going to do to actually get them to do it? Because something is to sign up. Like a lot of these MOOCs have exactly that problem. They get a lot of interest in sign-ups. People are like, yes, I want to take Harvard classes. Then just the retention is really low because it's so hard to convince yourself to keep coming back and to complete a course that like you don't lose anything if you don't complete. Right. So so then the thought process was, well, but people do spend all their extra time playing games and doing things that are like, like Candy Crush at the time, Clash Royale, whatever, like when they're in line, when they're waiting for a meeting, when they're at lunch, that's what they're doing with their time. What can we do to make that be Duolingo? Right. And so from the very beginning, it was designed to be like a game, but it really took all these years, and I think it's still a process to improve, because gamification isn't just something that you like throw onto a product. It's like adding layers and layers and layers and layers of things that make it more fun, like point system and now you can like pass your friends and you can unlock things, and then now there's a mascot and you can, I don't know, like earn points, and you can earn digital currency. Now you can buy things with the digital currency and you can get badges, Yeah. It sounds like you guys were very intentional about making sure people had positive reinforcement at every step of their progress in learning a language. And therefore, that made language learning so much more effective for them. And one thing I will say that our team did do a lot, and others in the company as well, where we just started having focused brainstorming sessions, which were like, okay, you play this game, you play that. We would just look at like the top games in the App Store in a particular time and just like divide among the team. Then we'd have people like in our meeting be like, go up and be like, okay, here, like with like screen grabs, like I thought it was interesting that they did this, and they did that, and I liked this sign up, and I liked, this like way of introducing the game or whatever. And then we would think like, okay, well, which of these do we really want to pay attention to? We think could be like most impactful, and how could we imagine Duolingo overlaid on Duolingo? Right. Is there an example that you can think of an idea that you guys borrowed from a game? I mean, I would say that probably all of our ideas we borrowed from the game. Even from the start, you had like the little hearts, then that became a strength bar, but you like lost hearts as you go. Right. That came from Zelda and many other games, stuff like that. The badges, we didn't come up with badges, right? That's a Foursquare / Swarm thing, but that has been used by a zillion other apps now. Right. We considered a bunch of others, and now I don't remember which ones we decided to do.
Great. It sounds like you were very disciplined about studying what was out there and borrowing very liberally, and also adapting, all of these to Duolingo.
Yeah, I think that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel if you are not an inventor.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Figure out what works. Yeah. And I don't think, we weren't like stealing. We were taking ideas and overlaying them on our own context.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there an example of an idea that you saw in a game that you realized wouldn't be a good idea for Duolingo?
Wouldn't be a good idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot, and funnily, like, there's a lot of stuff that we would discuss, and someone would be like, I love how this is like that, and I would just be like, I really wonder what the metrics are saying, because there are some things that you just really like and that feel good or look good or whatever, but then you look at the numbers and they're actually completely neutral or negative.
Right.
And there are things that we saw in other apps that we had already tried and we knew weren't positive for us. One thing that we've one thing that we struggled and sort of continue to struggle with is that one of the main things about Duolingo is that it's extremely simple, and that means design is simple. The user experience, the flow, like everything is supposed to be intuitive and clean, and we're very thoughtful about like not adding clutter and things. And more we started seeing that games were adding just like 70 different like layers of like point systems that you can get. Like you can get points that could then buy you these other points that can then like unlock this thing. And there's just so much going on at the same time that we often struggled with, like, should we, like, are we underestimating our users? Should we be throwing more things at them at the same time or not? Should we experiment? Does this completely veer off our brand? Is this going to maybe improve our metrics, but like make our user experience and design less good, which is something we really value. And so that was definitely an ongoing discussion.
You're right, because most games have multiple currencies, multiple meta games. There's a lot of directive gameplay. There's a lot of complexity in most smartphone games.
Yes, like side games and stuff like that.
How did you guys decide that, okay, that's not a path we're going to go down on?
Well, so what happened was we'd spent 2 years like really optimizing stuff, and originally there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. Like we would change the notification copy or change like the email subject line or change the timing of the notification, and we would see like 5% bumps, which is a lot in our numbers. And so we did that for 2 years. The badges was much more of a long-term investment. And then as we started looking at these like very sort of complex aspects to games and having these discussions with the rest of the company of like, should we even be trying this? Does it go against our design principles, etc.? Right. We started realizing that at this point we weren't really like a quote unquote growth hack team, in the sense that we weren't looking at hacks anymore. We were looking at like changing the product fundamentally. We were looking at adding huge features. Like the badges were a huge feature, but that was kind of a one-off. Yeah. And it didn't make sense for that to be done by a team that's just focused on growth. Got it. But a team that was more focused on like the experience, the gamification, the social aspect of Duolingo, so that it wasn't just like optimizing metrics for the sake of optimizing metrics. And we didn't think that it was high ROI, because all of these ideas would take a significant amount of time to build. Right. Yeah. So we ended up deprioritizing.
Just to switch gears a bit, you guys grew a lot internationally. Did you guys have to adapt the product experience itself to some of the international markets that you guys were in? For instance, if you're in Saudi Arabia, I would imagine this person's language is different, but also this person's expectation of the user experience is going to be very, very different. How did you guys adapt the product and the user experience to hundreds of different cultures around the world, if at all you did?
Our answer, I think, is very controversial here. Yeah. Yes, I agree. People have very different expectations of what an app should look like and should feel like, and the content, etc. We chose to ignore almost all of that. And so what we did is we localized, obviously. So when we launched the app in a new country, we would basically just make it available in the language of that country, and then we would like launch an English course, for example, for speakers of that language. Yeah. And a lot of our courses were created by volunteers, actually, using the Duolingo incubator, which is like this platform we created. People who really wanted to create a course for that language, either because they wanted to help people in their country get ahead or because they wanted to preserve their language. And they would create content that was like different anyway. Yeah. So there was a little bit of like a natural localization in that aspect beyond just the translations.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes to the product, we knew that like it might be a good idea to start really trying to make it specific to each market, but we also knew that it would add so much product complexity.
Yeah.
It was so hard to maintain in the long term in terms of the code, and it would slow us down tremendously, because now everything you do, you need to think about like how the app looks like in all these different countries and all these different platforms, and modify and do different designs, you know, and different flows. So we just didn't. And the truth is, and this might be controversial, but in my experience working with Duolingo, I think that people are more similar than they think they are around the world. I think that, you know, when you go to a country and someone will say like in this country, like in China or in Brazil or whatever, people really like free things.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, but they also really like free things everywhere else.
Yeah.
No, but here they really like free things, like very seriously. And I'm like, okay, I get that there's like something interesting here and there's a cultural nuance and we could explore, but I don't think that we need to completely reinvent Duolingo in order to do that. And so that worked for us in almost every market that we launched, with exceptions. So I would say that the two major exceptions are China and India.
Yeah.
Those are extremely difficult markets. I'm sure that is not news to anybody. So for India, that's the first place where we really, and that, again, full disclosure, was not my team. I worked with them, but Natalie Glantz, our director of engineering, led that effort along with Kai Law, who's the product manager. And we basically went to India, and they conducted a bunch of like interviews, and I talked to reporters, and we learned as much as we possibly could about internet usage in India and how people were using the app, and found that there were actually fundamental problems that prevented people from using Duolingo if we didn't do anything to the product. Like, for example, in India, a lot of the phones come pre-programmed in English. So when you buy your phone, it's in English. And it's just kind of how it is. And also, like, typing in Hindi is supposedly very difficult. So a lot of people get these phones and they're in English. They don't actually speak English. They just kind of learn how to use the phone. And then what happens is that Duolingo notices like what your UI language is, and it adapts to that. So people were now seeing Duolingo in English, and they didn't see the option to learn English, because from English we don't teach English. We would teach French, German, Spanish. You know, so like our English from Hindi was never seen by anyone in India. So we had to change the flow there specifically to match that.
Right. So you guys had a default flow in the local languages in India?
So what we actually launched an English from Hindi course, and we're working on other languages now. And so what we did is, like, if you're in India and your phone is set to English, we show learn English on Duolingo first.
Right.
Like override. Yeah,
that makes sense. I think there's just been a huge influx of smartphones in India, and I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily have English as their first language, but they absolutely want to be learning English, and I think that's a huge opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Like we also learned that a lot of people like buy their phones from like little shops, and they don't actually download their own apps. Like the shop downloads the apps for them. And so, like, I was talking to like this kind of very, very intelligent, well-read, amazing tech editor, and he was showing me his phone, and I was just like, okay, can you download Duolingo so that I can show you something? And he like did not know what I was talking about. It was like the App Store, and he was like, "What? Where's the App Store?"
Yeah.
So it's just a very different way of using technology, and if you want to grow in a market like that, where it totally makes sense for us, not only in terms of number of people, but also our mission. You know, there's a lot of people who could benefit from learning English in India, like significantly, could like really transform their lives. Then you do have to start paying attention to things like that.
Absolutely. And you guys are making such a huge difference to the world. You know, and as you mentioned earlier, learning English in a country like Brazil or India can make a huge difference in the kind of money somebody makes, can pull people out of poverty. Gina, I know we're brushing up against the end of our time together. So I would...
Oh, no.
Yeah. And this has been wonderful. I would love to start to wrap up here.
Yeah.
Before we go, can you tell people how they can find out more about you?
Yeah. So let's see. If they're interested in learning more about the A/B testing kind of stuff that we did in the growth team, this is a really great interview that came out of the first round published, and they are just I think First Round Review is so good at
Yeah.
what they do. Like their articles
Yeah.
are excellent.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that they interviewed me and then transformed everything I said into something that's a lot smarter than what I actually said. But that interview has a lot of interesting information about like kind of like A/B tests that we tried and what worked and what didn't work. I think it's called like the growth hacking tenets of something A/B testing.
From Duolingo's Master Growth Hacker.
Master Growth Hacker, yeah,
Yes.
that's me.
Yes.
I guess find me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
I'm LinkedIn. My username is Gina from Brazil.
Wonderful. I will link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. But as always, this has been very, very exciting to speak with you, Gina. Thanks so much for being on How Things Grow.
My pleasure, Shaman. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. I hope to see you around soon. All right.
See you soon. Bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. If any of this was helpful or instructive, I would love for you to leave us a review or rating on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast fix. This podcast takes a ton of time, effort, and love to produce, and I deeply value every review and every piece of feedback that you share.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.